All right. Let's get see who's here. Oh, I'm not sharing yet. That's why my interface looked all different. So me and should probably alphabetize this list so it's easier to go down. Oh, hey, Josh.
Yeah, no, I haven't missed the last couple, but
I go ping some people on Slack and see if they're coming.
There's Christian.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I was muted. Sorry for being late.
All good. We're just seeing who's all here.
You know what? We're 4 minutes in. I've
Yep.
pinged Jeremy. He might be able to come later. But thanks everyone for being here. We've got a few things on action item review we'll go over. And I know you were talking about this a little bit already before, but just to get it on the recording, we'll review that. And then 2 discussion points today. One is the status of the provision to disk pull requests. We're in a 3rd generation now. Get some feedback on that, have some discussion, and then following that, make a decision about what to do about releasing 462, especially in light of that. But anything else to discuss today before we get started with reviewing past action items?
I thought that we had added the common room, or maybe we want to talk about that.
Oh, you know what?
Yeah.
I think I said that I would, but
Yeah.
did I? Weird. Yeah, let's put that on here.
Sure.
Nope, this is the wrong place for it. I'm just gonna put your name on there. Oh, come on. What is going on? There we go. Okay. So first thing is documenting the Werewolf steering meeting on werewolf.org and coupling that with an about page. Rose had drafted that, and I think if we go to werewolf.org now, we can see. Oh, what?
I know it's weird. So it's not in there. You have to
It's
like
not in this menu.
No, I know, but you have to widen.
Oh,
I know. I was going to tell you about that. Yeah, it's right there.
That's weird. Oh, is there a link to the website repo? I would like to help.
yeah. So
Okay,
that
I'll go
is
find it.
here.
It's not super like because there's like 5 different ones. So let him give you the.
It's been through a few iterations, but the correct one is the werewolf.org repo in the werewolf thing.
Thank you.
So I will put a note about that. I
happen to build a lot of websites for fun and pleasure, so I'm sure I could help
You know
here.
what? I found this one not particularly pleasant to work in. So any contribution that you can have is appreciated.
Agreed.
Yeah, Gatsby is not for the light of heart. Jesus.
When I went to go review Rose's PR, it wouldn't even build, and I had to work on the packages.json to get non-conflicting dependencies in. So I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah.
It builds again.
Okay, that's encouraging.
Yeah. Next thing, Rose. I'm gonna say this is done anyway. Done and then done at But Rose, what is the status of PEARC25 BOF planning?
Yeah, so they are not ready to give us our day and time and space and all of that stuff. They said, please hold. We appreciate your enthusiasm. So those sorts of details. And I am working on like a draft outline for us to be following, kind of taking in all the suggestions that we've talked about. So I'll be able to share that with you guys soon.
Do we have someone from the community for the 10 or 15 minutes or whatever it is on the schedule that's willing to be the people that stand up and talk about their deployment yet, by any chance?
No, I love that. So yeah, one of the things that I had posted in the community was like, hey, we're going to this. Is anybody else going? So I'm gonna redo that post as well and see if we can get some people. I mean, us is great, all the people in this particular room. But you know, there's more of us, hopefully, that will be there.
Well, yeah, in particular on the schedule that we had proposed, we said that we would have a presentation from someone giving us a report of how they have Werewolf deployed in their environment and what their experiences have been. So better to get someone signed up for that sooner than later.
You know, I
Um,
have some in mind. Thank you for you know, saying it in a different way. I have a couple of people in mind to reach out to individually. You know what I mean? Maybe instead of just there. Is anybody here, if you have a thought of somebody that you know that is going or maybe would want to go or do a presentation like that, I think that'd be great. I can actually think of 3 off the top of my head right now. So I'll reach out to them personally.
So Tim, I think, yeah, Tim has just shared out also, Rose, that the BOF is now what is happening? The BOF is listed on the PERC website now and has a room assigned here. So
Really?
yeah.
Okay. Well, she told me to slow down, so I guess I went to the wrong person.
It's been fast moving. So
I'm sorry, what?
it's been fast moving.
Cool.
The process getting it up, and that might be a premium. I'm not sure. So
Yeah, but we can like work on most of this up until the last minute. But the one thing that I think we need to schedule sooner than later is just making sure that we have someone who's willing to stand up and talk about their real life deployment. Because if I think we have, well, it won't be here. I can review outside of the meeting, but I'm fairly certain that one of the things we said we would do is have a site report of some kind. All right. And then anything, or Rose, do you want to give an update on what's going on between us and OpenHPC regarding SC25?
Yeah, so we have they have accepted our and we have accepted their invitation to be part of what's going on with them. We will not be the only provisioner that they reach out to. They're also going to be talking to, I think it's Lenovo. And so I think that that's pretty exciting. There are maybe some other people who are not super jazzed about that. But I think for everyone that kind of had a comment about it, it seemed like it would be a pretty good idea. So I don't have any more details, but Chris, I believe it was, said that he'd reach back out when they kind of finalized their. But I mean, I think Tim, you're kind of part of that team too. Do you have like more insight on from the inside?
there's not. I'm not actually on the TSC, so I haven't heard any communications. But and the last 2 meetings have been canceled, so I don't have any additional insight on.
Your audio is kind of funky.
Okay, I'll fix it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds.
it seems like there's another mic that you might be using unintentionally.
Yeah, I think it's the right thing, at least for a first BOF attempt. Like last year, we had a BOF in our booth, in the CIQ booth. I think this is a good next step there, and I certainly wouldn't want to be trying to compete for audience space. I think it was Jeremy pointed out that there's a good chance if we did, in the off chance that we had our own BOF at SC, they'd probably schedule us at the same time, which seems like a worst case scenario. So I'm excited about collaborating with OpenHPC on this, and I'm interested to see whether Lenovo will collaborate with it as well, but we'll see.
And
All
is
right. Anything?
my audio better?
Yes,
Yes.
much better.
So was the sound suppression was cutting my voice out. I had some noise in the background and I got rid of that. I don't have any additional insight into OpenHPC and what's going on in terms of the BOF.
Anything else that we need to discuss about these or any missing action items before we move on to general discussion on our discussion points here? Oh. Welcome, Jeremy. All right, that moves us to the status of provision to disk.
Okay.
Oh, and I will briefly summarize the story so far, and then talk about some of the feedback that came in earlier this week, and we can discuss that as necessary, point by point. So Christian put forward a first pull request that uses the Dracket two-stage boot to write the node image to a disk rather than to TempFS, and then iterated on that to remove the first pass had support for updating that over time. Or actually, I think it did the image retrieval using rsync in the first place, right?
Yeah,
You had an
but
rsync B.
the rsync removal, that's not removed, but that was not the complicated part. To be really honest, that's if you want that's really just so I wrote that module to WW control that you can configure rsync D, but that's kind of just it's now to write that down. It's really just straightforward. Yeah.
So one aspect of this, and writing the image to a disk is not really that hard. You can just, instead of mounting a TempFS and writing it there, you mount a block device and
the
write it there.
hard part is getting the disks ready.
Yes, it's making the disks prepared. So Christian did this with Ignition because we already had Ignition in Warewulf. Great. We received some feedback from Greg that after some discussion about why two-stage boot, why Dracket, all of that was fine. But he had suggested or requested that we not require the use of Ignition for this to work. So the current pull request that I've been working on here builds on Christian's and adds support for sfdisk, makefs, mkfs, mkswap, and then we already had an fs tab overlay. Let's kind of, where's mine? And then well, I think there's basically two things here that still need, like there was a bunch of feedback. I think there's basically two big things that still need to be done. One is that there's no reason why you should have to specify mounts with an FS tab overlay. We should just drop systemd mount units in when we create a file system, just like Ignition was already doing. So I think that's the first thing. That's the easy thing. And then the second,
Yeah, but that's FS tab is nice because it's kind of the, how do you call that in it's the inherent knowledge of generations of sysadmins knowing what should be there. You just do a cat as a cat FS tab.
I more just mean it should happen automatically. We shouldn't have to explicitly configure it. That's all I'm saying. Jeremy, did you have something else?
Oh no, I'm the opposite. I mean, like the moving forward, I am perfectly fine moving the units. I'm in the same boat as I am shifting all of our cluster from cron to timers. It's the, the reality is things are moving, and I especially for something like this when we're talking about building up a node from scratch for a full stateful boot. I have no problem if, you know, if we're dropping some more of the legacy components.
Yeah, I think unit file versus FS tab is not the point I'm trying to make. I just think that there's no reason why you should have to make the file system and then say it should be mounted separately. That should all be consolidated like Ignition already was doing. The second thing is I think I finally now am understanding, like Christian was suggesting that it is, so right now the way you configure each of these overlays is with a separate resource and you're getting the data from a different place. And I reviewed the way file systems and disks and partitions are currently supported in the native built-in disk stuff that came in when Christian first implemented Ignition support. And I think, changing my mind that that is a good thing for us to manage as a first-class concern within the Warewulf data model and to support that idea. And that rather than requiring a separate resource for SF disk and makeFS and all of that, just maybe optionally like support that because there's more functionality in there than you can get with that base data model right now, but that it should by default read that data from the native configuration that's already there. So in my head, I was advocating for deprecating and getting rid of that. But if we're going to have multiple ways to partition and multiple ways to format disks, it makes sense for us to draw a line in the sand about what it means for Warewulf to configure them. And then those overlays can kind of fall in line with that. I think that that gets us on the same page with it.
You're right. The reason why I decided to use Ignition is not that it's just because this is a kind of solved problem. And other people with more kind of expertise thought about how a data structure for configuring and setting disks, how it must look like. Because when you start doing it on your own, you suddenly realize, yeah, you have to add this option and that option. And the Ignition people kind of solved that. There's another solution like which I like more. It's from SUSE. It's integrated into YAML. It's called, I think, lib file system or something like this. It's a C++ library which is then doing all the stuff like Ignition. They also have kind of, but it's a kind of similar data structure. You have to have a data structure for the disks, one for the partitions, and another one for the file system.
Yeah, and the big win with Ignition here was that Ignition already had a Dracket module that we could just import and use. Whereas I had to build all the stuff for makeFS and
So
SF
again,
disk and stuff by hand.
what was the major issue? Apologize if I missed anything. What is the major issue with continuing to use Ignition?
So there's not a problem with continuing to use Ignition. The concern was in depending on it such that you couldn't do this without it.
Oh, okay.
And so one of those is, I think, largely a cultural concern and just a concern of having larger external dependencies that Warewulf doesn't work without. But one of the other is a literal, practical expression of that, which is Ignition isn't in Rocky 8. And we, as an example of, we can't necessarily depend on it being places.
I've noticed that it's not always available. And the other thing, it's Ignition is a much bigger than just partitioning. It does a lot of stuff.
Yeah. For example, I in my mind, I wanted to use Cloud Init for this because it can do this and can do all of those things. And I was like, oh, Cloud Init could do a lot of the Warewulf provisioning stuff that we're doing. What if we started depending on it similarly to how we depend on systemd, let's say? But Cloud Init is a Python application. So if we were going to support it at this stage of the boot, we'd have to include like an entire Python stack into the initRD and who knows what else. And that is a fairly unusual thing. And I haven't tried to do that yet, but at the very least, that is why there is not a Cloud Init module for Dracket today.
Everybody should know my feelings on Python.
I'm not a Python hater. I still like Python a lot, but that doesn't mean I want to pull it into an initRD. So
What's the under?
Python hater? It's called just realistic about Python.
Yeah, I would say I actually like Python as a language. The ecosystem is just such a dumpster fire that I
There is
just
a
don't
lot
like
of
it.
it.
Yeah. The one question I did have that, and I started digging into it on the looking at the underlying components of Ignition. Just because I was wondering the question, because Ignition is such a big thing, does it then implement other underlying components to do its disk partitioning that we could simply extract out or move to?
I think I got lost there. Could
I'm
you?
sorry. Does Ignition, when Ignition does its disk partitioning and disk setup, is there an underlying mechanism that it uses that we could use instead?
So in fact, Ignition expects to be the underlying mechanism, and it tells you explicitly not to call it directly. And it says you should be using a different tool to define your configuration and passing it to Ignition. I think that is why you can pull it into an initRD. It is a monolithic thing that is
Okay.
doing that work. I don't think we can use anything
Okay.
inside of it.
Yeah, because that was the other thing. Is there any way to do all of this work with, oh, nice. That apparently I'm not moving around enough. If there was an underlying way to do this with System D and some of the
I
System D
looked,
setup.
yeah, so I wish that you could just do this with System D, and I'm kind of baffled that System D doesn't. Maybe a future version that's not in like Rocky 8 and 9 can do this, but I have not yet seen System D be able to natively just create partitions and such.
Okay.
They seem more on the why do you have a disk side of it than the actually partitioning it.
They do have some tools now, and I've seen some work on getting the whole boot process through Systemd, but it's not in Rocky 9. I just checked, so.
But even then, it's kind of Systemd always expect that the disk is formatted in the right way. It does not really care about file system and the file system you are on.
There seems to be there's some tools for repartitioning and
there's
formatting.
Systemd boot, which we have to look at a given point into. But the thing with Systemd boot is always that it does not support all architectures.
Okay.
So the last thing that I want to address. So Christian noticed that this pull request, this increasingly large and wide pull request, adds a new directory, www.init. It's actually /warewulf/www.init.d, where Ignition and sfdisk and makefs and makeswap all drop scripts, and that's how the current pull request implements their ability to partition disks before the image is written. I think that we're like that is a necessary thing for this kind of work. Ignition was doing it before by writing directly into that script, into the kind of Dracket module. This just breaks it out so that can run it. But Christian, I think your concern was with the other one that runs scripts.
Now I get it, because you are dropping the scripts before Ignition, before the disk is formatted, and that's good. Then we have WRB. Yeah, you are right.
So that one already existed, and I think I agree with you that that thing could go away in a future version by taking things that need to run earlier and putting them in this new location, and taking things that don't and making them Systemd units. But since I didn't want to make that change right now, I just added one, and I struggled with what it should be called to differentiate it. But so I'm way open to suggestions for what those directories should be called. But for now, I just documented them.
Yeah, I don't really care. My biggest nit is I like to follow the Linux file system standards. And there is a directory already specifically set up for things needed for booting and a system.
Yeah, but we just have a different definition of what it means to be booting at this stage, right? So these are things that are explicitly happening before init, and anything that is when it's booting is going to be something init takes care of, and we don't want it doing it when it can.
Which, yeah, like that's why I said there's a directory for stuff that happens before init in the standard boot.
Oh,
Slash
you're
boot
saying we
is
should put
supposed
it
to
in
be,
slash boot?
yeah. It should just, all this should be a subdirectory under slash boot.
You know what? I am not opposed to the idea that we should move slash werewolf to slash boot slash werewolf.
Yeah.
But that would be a relatively major change that would require changes in our images as well, because well, no, because the images exclude boot, but that doesn't mean we couldn't write into it with an overlay. I don't know. That's a good idea.
Be able-
Anyway.
so as soon as we could write into boot, we would not need a network for booting anymore.
Well, no, the overlay can drop slash werewolf into
Yeah.
slash boot is all I'm
I
saying.
get, like I said, this is one of my nits. I'm like, there's a standard out there. Linux file systems kind of can be kind of messy in the modern world, but so I like to follow it. Plus, I like when you follow it, then I know where stuff is.
Jeremy, I would be on that side if you wouldn't mind creating an issue for it.
Yeah.
I think that's like a werewolf 3 or not 3, a werewolf 5 thing more than a werewolf 4 dot something thing, but
Yeah.
that's also not too far in the future necessarily. So I would be supportive of that.
I actually looked into it when I was looking at modularizing the whole WW init, so I could start dropping special stuff in there that I could turn on and off.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Let me go back and look at that again. I'll do that, because if it's not horribly bad, then I should just put it in as a PR and just move it in a future
See what
version.
happens.
Yeah.
So Tim, I know you reviewed this as well. Do you have any feedback that I didn't catch already in my narrative here?
I've only reviewed it up until before you started sticking the file system commands in there,
Okay.
the partitioning and things like that. Just based off my experience, the approach I would tend to take is that the scripting stuff you do is very rigid. So you only stick to a small set of file systems and things like that, so you can cut down the option space, and then leave all the flexibility into the ignition type route, just to keep things simple. That's all.
The way it is right now is trying to be as thin a layer around the tools as possible. So that does leave options for it to break for sure, but it also doesn't get in the way. So I don't know.
Yeah. And I didn't get a chance to look at it. So there's the options for creating disks and things like that are now a first-class citizen for data structures inside of Warewulf. Is that correct?
So
Like
those
and
data
disks
structures have existed since Ignition was first released in Warewulf. These new overlays do not use those data structures. And at the time, I made that decision thinking that we would move away from those data structures. But I believe right now I am convinced in the other direction. And so I currently have 2 actions for this PR. One is to make the new overlays use the built-in data types so you can use the native commands and it will just use them. And then the second is to make the mounts be automatic like they are with Ignition.
Jonathan, quick question on does the modern SF disk support GPT?
Yes, and it's using that by default.
Okay, thank you.
It's pretty clean as well. I've had no problems with it.
Yeah, at no point were the tools a problem in any of this development. SF Disk was actually pretty slick. I'd never used it before, but it just kind of worked and did exactly what I wanted it to do. Christian, we've talked a little bit about your feedback, but any other things that I haven't missed, or with the understanding of these 2 action items, how do you feel about what's going on
I'm
there?
feeling good. The only thing which is a bit missing, and I pointed this also out, the documentation it's as good as the one we had. It could be better.
Yeah, you pointed out one thing in particular that was missing that I
Yeah,
absolutely thought
the
was right.
thing, what exactly happens when it finds already partition, the partitions have the wrong sizes.
Right, overwriting or not.
This
Yeah,
is
things
kind
like that.
of tricky, and that's really a tricky part, because this is the, yeah.
I
But
think
that's
ultimately
it.
the issue is that, like, getting this to work, it requires putting a bunch of things together, and it's documented as a bunch of things. And
Right.
so I think ultimately we're going to need a separate page that's just like a full stack example of doing a stateful boot. And then and that'd be a good thing to add.
Yeah, and also perhaps we should then perhaps add to this pull request a separate profile which has already a valid ignition profile for disk so that you can just include that. So with a root system, a scratch system, and a swap partition, like you had it, then it's really easier to set up. But you then would just have to edit the disk device, and then you are done.
Yeah.
So I had no real problems getting it running on my system with the ignition version before you started doing the additional patches. Yet there was a couple things that were not documented, but I think that could be cleaned up.
I know, I didn't document them.
No, well,
The thing is, I still have to look up the documentation when I test it. So
Yeah,
it's
part of it has been I have been confused and afraid of the disk commands in Werewolf Control in the past, so I've avoided them. But the data model looks good, so I need to investigate kind of within myself what's scaring me away from it, and maybe there's documentation or work that can be done there. But I feel pretty good about this as a next and hopefully final step for, well, not this. This is already there, but a final step for getting this working. But to move on to our next thing, we are
Jonathan,
2 months. Oh, yeah.
1 second, a thought came to my mind.
Great.
Is there going to be any provisions for data safety at all? In the sense that if you misconfigure a node, you potentially could wipe however people set up their systems. It's never happened in my environment. So, is there
So, I mean,
some like basic ways of protecting data that doesn't need to be wiped?
within Ignition, there are settings, and these are piped through to the native stuff of whether or not to wipe partition table and whether or not to wipe file systems that it detects. The SF disk overlay doesn't have a provision for wiping or not the partition table. If you give it a partition table, it writes it. But the file system ones, the makefs and makeswap, do check to see if the file system if there is already a file system where it's being told to put one, and does not wipe unless it does not wipe unless it is able to detect that there is not one, or it has been told to overwrite. So that's the basic level of, yes, there is something, but it is, there are always ways for it to go wrong, I'm sure.
I think as long as you're using partition labels, then a paranoid sysadmin would just not have automatic partition and always assume that there's going to be a partition table. And if it looks correct, then it can write to it.
I think what I would recommend for people, and if this were my environment, I would probably have 2 profiles, or okay, I would probably have a profile that configures the disks, and then a separate profile that just tells them that they're there. And
Yeah.
once the nodes have booted, I would disable everything from writing.
Yeah. And I would document that. I think that's safe enough.
Yeah.
Because it's not too hard to fat finger your storage cluster to get
At
formatted.
least we wouldn't have the circumstance here where you accidentally write into a network share, but I guess unless you have a block device. I kind of have done that. Oh well. So the next thing then is, when do we release 4.6.2? So off of our previously scheduled monthly schedule, we are now 2 months behind. And not that there's no catching up. There's just like, when are we going to do the next release? And we were delaying it because I was hoping to get this PR into the next release. But basically, I'm just asking the committee, I'm asking this group, do we continue to delay and work on this, which might take, another week or two, depending on schedules, and try and get this into a 462? Or do we release a 462 sooner? I think there's still a couple of like small bugs I'd like to get into 462 before release, but that's less of
But
an issue.
did we have any important changes since the other one? I don't think we merged anything.
There's a couple bug fixes that there's one in particular. Let me try and find it. No, I want pull requests and so this SE Linux thing was a bug that's gotten fixed. And then your fix for profile set, being able to configure storage on profiles.
Yeah, but that's going well together with the disk configuration.
Again, I'm not necessarily bringing an opinion here. I can express one, but I'm more just like checking with this group. Would we like to put out a 462 now or soon? Or do we want to continue to wait until we are able to get this into it?
There doesn't seem to be a lot of urgent or important stuff in the queue right now. I would tend to wait and get 462 out.
Okay, let me go back here to this and see type bug XO. This was the other one that I really want to get into a 462. This is like super annoying and embarrassing that if you edit an existing, so if you have a site overlay and you edit it, sorry, if you have a distribution overlay and you edit it, it makes a copy of it as a site overlay, and that copy, all the permissions are wrong. So we need to fix that. I think the rest of them are relatively low priority. Yeah. But yeah, if the tone in here, which is what I'm hearing, is that we should wait for the PR work to be done, no complaint from me. I just wanted to check in.
Perhaps if it's not out by another month, then we do a release.
Yeah. Okay.
Implicit in that decision is that we're prioritizing the disk to work, and I think that seems to be something that the community is holding their breath for. At least some folks are.
Yeah. All right. Any other discussion on a 462 release? If not, we'll go on to Rose. And Rose, what can you tell us about CIQ's ask for common room access to Warewulf, Warewulf Slack in particular?
Oh, yes. Pretty pleased with sugar on top. So we have had a couple of conversations, and it was actually been kind of fun just thinking about the Warewulf community and the Slack and the people who are involved there. We talked a little bit about getting like a pro version of Slack. That seems to be might be a bit much. Chris and I were doing a little bit of research on other open source projects, and really the price is kind of wild. It's like $5,000 to $10,000 a month.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah. So that might be a little much at this point in the game for the Warewulf community. But that is still a thought on the table. The common room that we are requesting that we can add. So basically the information that is no personal information in terms of like the private messages, the private conversations, the private channels, like that's not anything that would be related back to CIQ. It's really just about making sure that any questions are not, drifted away, that they are captured. The person's name and email does get sent over if they ask a question, but it's not like an automatic download of everything that is in there. Chris, do you have some more insight and want to speak a little bit more to the common room instance?
I mean, I'm vaguely familiar with Common Room.
Yeah.
I think what needs to happen is if the community is okay with using it or, having it in Slack with them, we need to disclose whatever information it's gathering very openly.
That's right.
In an open manner, at the very least, in terms of like notifying people on Slack that, hey, there is another tool working in the background to help us, build up FAQs, troubleshooting tips, the whole 9 yards. Here's the data it collects. And, if you have a problem, let us know. Not exactly the most community way to do it, but it sounded like from Rose and I's discussion that it was widely accepted as okay in theory.
So I want to hear from Christian, Tim, and Jeremy on this, because the last thing I would want to do is like ram something through from a CIQ perspective. Maybe
Right.
first, Christian, what do you think of this coming from a SUSE perspective? Would there be a concern with CIQ having
Not at the
a thing
moment.
like that? Okay.
Yeah. So there.
Yeah.
was a
I
question-
don't, I have no issues only because I'm not going to post anything to Slack that I don't expect the entire world to see in perpetuity.
I think most people act in that manner as well, or at least try to.
I see it as no different than the archiving available by the paid Slack. And so just mentioning that it's similar to the search capability for paid Slack. And assuming that it's just it scrapes all the public channels.
So maybe I have made too much of this then. Is it the feeling of the committee, with myself recused at this point, that there is no real concern and we should allow CIQ to enable Common Room to have access to the Warewulf Slack public channels, probably mostly general and help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would put a statement somewhere there and then
Yeah.
something you may want to consider about letting other folks have access to the data from the community if they're building up FAQs or something like that.
Yeah, so that was where this conversation went originally. So Rose, can you speak about who has access to this data and if and how any of it might be shared with the community?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like a behind a closed door, but it is a paid door. So it is also a bit cost prohibitive I mean, I don't even have access to it. It's not like a widely used. I think we have like 1 or 2 people. We would love to share whatever information that we get, especially, the type of questions that are coming in, because it helps the community. And when the community is alive and thriving and responsive, then that is beneficial for, definitely CIQ as a company. And, of course, others that are using Warewulf. So we're happy to share that information, but actually getting you access to the instance, that is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think access to the instances should be considered a blocker here. Maybe if we enabled this, if we added it to the instance and configured it, is there some time frame where, I don't know who the right person at CIQ would be for this, but where someone from CIQ could say, hey, this is the information we're getting, not literally a dump, but this is what we're taking away from it. This is what is coming out of it. This is why it's valuable. And this is what we're putting back in as a result.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can imagine quarterly probably would
Quarterly?
be,
Okay.
but I can get back with you and get like, a confirmation and an agreement. But I would love that. I think you guys would love that, and it would benefit us individually and as a community. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I would highly encourage you to reach out to whomever owns Common Room and, have it set up prior to even introducing it. You know, we'll get reports at a certain interval that we can share.
Yeah, yeah, I think that'd be great. Because again, I haven't even really seen it either, because there's not a lot of internal access. It just is kind of a new thing for us. So it's actually pretty good. So far so good. The communities that we do have access to, it's like, okay, wow, yeah, this is valuable for all the reasons that we've already discussed, of being able to, you know, really take the information and kind of sift through it of what's important, the questions that are asked, and then get some idea of common questions. I mean, I know, again, you guys probably already have this, but the way that Slack is set up, it's not very conducive to being able to do that. So Common Room apparently does that, but
Yeah. So,
So-
Rose, I think maybe like next actions on this could be, one, if CIQ or whoever's doing the common room stuff could put together like a disclaimer type text that we could then put somewhere on Slack or on the website, or maybe both, about what's being collected, and then the committee could vet that and accept that. And then some kind of commitment from someone that's doing common room at CIQ about an interval at which a report would come back about what is coming out of that process.
yeah,
Would-
totally. Oh, sounds good.
Would the archives be available as well? I mean, that might be another way to attack it, is not, in addition to that, install one of these, I just did a quick search, Slack archivers, which can also archive just the raw data to a location for historical purposes.
So I know the Kubernetes community used to do that. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but it was a thing at one point in time.
That's a separate like Slack extension we could install. Like maybe this is
Yeah,
separate to the
it's like
common
another
room.
application that has an API connection to Slack, and just literally keeps a running log of each channel's activity.
Where does it? I mean, maybe we can talk offline about this, but do you know where it stores that, where and how you get access to
Where
it?
you tell it.
Okay, so you just provide it somewhere to dump that. That
Yeah,
might be
basically.
a cool thing to do, regardless.
Yeah.
And that would kind of like level the playing field for other folks in the community that may want to mine the data, mine the chat for archives, or just simple
Mhm.
search, right? Given that Slack doesn't retain very much data in the free instance.
Yep, not unless you pay for it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any other discussion on that then?
I guess the last thing would be post a retention information about it. Like, is it going to be more than 10 years or 7 years or things like that?
Okay, so I'm gonna take actions up here. These go away because these are done. Wait, this is the wrong place. It's up here. And how's that look? Rose, any concerns there? No. Okay.
Oh,
Well, oh,
the cadence, the feedback cadence, right? Is that in there? No, report back to
right. So yeah.
what will be shared, how it will be retained, and okay, yeah, I guess a report. Okay, there you go. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll add that so we know how frequently also. All right. With that, I think that concludes our Werewolf Technical Steering Committee meeting. Thanks you everyone for participating, for attending, and yeah, we'll see. Oh wait, when is our next one? I think our next one is in 2 weeks. Yes, on the 18th of June.
Okay.
So we'll hope to see you all then. Yeah, June 18th.
Bye.